At the end of the day, it's not about what you have or even what you've accomplished. It's about what you've done with those accomplishments. It's about who you've lifted up, who you've made better. It's about what you've given back. Denzel Washington. Welcome to Inspire Vision. Our sole purpose is to elevate the lives of others and to inspire you to do the same.
Michelle, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, I'm really excited for this. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So now, where are you located?
I am in Portland, Oregon.
Oh my goodness. Okay. So let's have you tell the audience a little bit about yourself. What I find interesting is the stories that bring people to the point where they are when we're doing the podcast. So I'd love for you to share with the audience your story.
Once upon a time, I'm just having fun. I got my doctorate in cognitive psychology at Princeton University, and I went on to become a psychology professor, but I kept feeling like something was missing. I just couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. And as time went by, I discovered that I could sing. I discovered that I could write songs. I discovered that I wasn't bad on the guitar. And I realized that I wanted to be a rock and roll star. I wanted to be a musician, a professional musician. I wanted to make that leap. So a few people, I was at Santa Clara University at the time. A few people thought I was crazy, but I did it, and I did get a record deal. And it just made me think that people like me don't know what all of their gifts are, what all of their strengths and talents are. And so after I had a career as a musician, one day I had a DJ ask me, hey, do you think you'll ever go back to teaching? And I'm like, no, I'm a rock star. Why would I want to do that? But then I realized I really did want to go back to teaching, because if I could find a gift I didn't know I had, maybe I'm a good teacher. Maybe I could help other people find gifts that they don't know they have. So I started teaching workshops, and I've been doing it for 20 years.
Wow, that's fantastic. And it's so interesting that, as you said, teaching. I have my daughter, my 26-year-old daughter, actually was heading towards a PhD in sociology research. And she hit the master's, got her master's, and then it's like I get this call that, Dad, I'm not sure I want to continue. And it's like, you know what? Good for you. Take your time to go out and do something. And, you can always go back. But if you spend another 3 to 4 years working on that PhD and then you find you don't like it, you've lost 4 to 5 years. So it's fascinating how people do that. And what's interesting to me is how many people are actually doing something that they think they should be doing. And you know what? It at least based on some of my research, and you're going to have a lot more information on this, what are the physical effects? What are the health effects? What are the mental effects for someone who has been told this is what you need to do? And so they end up following that advice and then find themselves 5 years, 10 years, 20 years in that profession.
I think the number one thing that people will feel is not alive anymore. They won't have energy anymore. I mean, they can develop all kinds of little problems like carpal tunnel and, shoulder issues if they have tech jobs or they're in front of a computer a lot and it's not something they're calling. They're more likely to have little illnesses like that creep up. But I would say the number one thing that happens is that your life force just sort of drains out of you. It causes depression, anxiety, and just sort of a little bit of deadness in the heart,
Well, and, it's interesting. I mean, I come from a family of 5 boys, right? And my dad was a university professor, taught, actually, you'll love this, he taught classical music. He was a voice teacher. And and an nationally known one. But anyway, it's interesting because he told each one of us, you will get an advanced degree, and I'm not paying for it.
My dad didn't pay for my degree either.
So it was really interesting. Older brother, Harvard business, couple of attorneys, me a dentist, and so on and so forth. One brother did not do it. He did not go to college, and I think that he experienced a lot of difficulty with my dad because my dad was really not happy with that. And of course, guess who is the one that, yeah, financially has done the best.
Seriously? Well,
Oh,
that's
seriously. And so it's so interesting that, we get pushed to do something and we do that. And, do I know whether my brothers were happy or not? I can't tell you. Was I happy doing dentistry? I enjoyed it for quite a while, but ultimately some physical issues came up.
Mhm.
And as I look back on that, it's like, wow, that is just amazing how that can happen.
Yeah, I think the body starts to shut down, we occupy bodies, we're spirits in bodies. And if we're not on course, if we're not on our path, our bodies will let us know.
So what happens? Why do we not really from the get-go understand what our passion is and what our gifts are?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question because that's sort of what I've been devoting my whole life to trying to understand. So I've been teaching these workshops for over 20 years, and I've had so many thousands of clients now. And I've noticed that no two people are alike, not even twins. I think that people come in with a unique purpose and unique gifts to, use to follow that purpose. But as soon as we come into this world, there's a lot of rules. And we're surrounded by different sorts of tribes, groups of people that we belong to. Number one, the family. And often the family that you're in does not see your gifts, or they see them, they don't understand them, or they might ignore them. They don't notice them. And then the next tribe that we're in are schools. And a lot of times teachers don't recognize our gifts, or they might even shame us for our gifts because we're not doing what they expect. And then there's the culture that we live in. So I can give you an example. When I was growing up, I had a gift for playing soccer, but I grew up at a time when girls were not allowed to play soccer. So I never got to use that gift. So we come in with these unique gifts, but the world tells us to conform, be like everybody else. And so if a gift isn't recognized or if it's shamed, we sort of take that gift and we stuff it way deep inside, deep into the unconscious, and we forget all about it. Although it's sort of there trying to get our attention the whole time, but it's sort of a protection mechanism. But the problem is you start to go through life and you start to feel empty. You start to feel like something's missing, like I did, when I was a professor. So I think it's mostly that power of the society around us telling us to conform, to be like everyone else, to do what we're supposed to do, like your father wanting everybody to go to school and get a degree. That happens a lot.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, and you mentioned one thing that I'm very cognizant of right now. You talk about how children as young people can be shamed because of the gifts that they have. And not only by family, but by teachers. And I've been doing a few podcasts about bullying, and that's not where we're going to go today. But just as a brief thought and comment, what do parents? Number one, what would you advise parents as far as they're raising their children? How can they help their children to discover their gifts rather than shame them? Number one. And then number two, what's your comments about teachers that are shaming their students?
Well, I used to be a teacher, so I tried really hard not to do that. I think for parents, and granted, parents are so busy and they've got so much they're trying to do, but really, what my number one recommendation is just to slow down and watch your child. Just watch your child. Pay attention to what they're doing. Pay attention to what draws them. There's a very good chance it's going to fall outside the expectations that you have for that child. You did a wonderful job of bringing a human being into the world, and I just thank you for that. But that human being has its own purpose and it has its own gifts. He or she, or and to give them permission to discover who they are and to support that. And for as far as teachers are concerned, I, when I taught at Santa Clara University, for example, I remember once I went into a room where the teachers hung out, professors hung out, and I could tell that there was one professor there who was going to deliberately give one of his students a bad grade because he didn't like the way he did something. It wasn't, it, it just wasn't what he thought was the right way to do it. And he wanted to punish him. And there's no need for that. There's no need for that. There's so many different ways to express writing, for example. Whatever field you want to go into, there's so many different ways to do that and to allow students to have their own unique take on it. Yeah, that's what I would say. And I always tried to stay out of my students' ways. In fact, I would try to help them figure out what it was that they wanted to do. They would often come to my office hours. I had so many of my students come to my office hours. It was amazing, asking for advice about what they should do. And I always said, follow your heart, just follow your heart. And that often took them in a very, very good direction. But it's not what other professors were telling them.
Well, and it's interesting as you talk about parents and expectations. How do you help a parent? Okay, how do you help a parent to recognize, excuse me, that they have expectations that may have been forced on them by their parents or by society or whatever? How do you help a parent to actually recognize that, okay, you know what? I do not have to put my expectations on my child. I need to allow them to discover their own gifts. How do you help a parent to do that?
I just love that you even asked that question. I think that just that question is halfway there, just to even know that that's what's going on, to raise awareness that you might unconsciously be putting expectations onto your child without knowing it. You will know. What you need to do is try to see what the signs are. So it'll be a contraction in the stomach. It'll be a tightening in the jaw. It will be a shaking of the head. It will be you'll say no somehow to something that your child is doing, and to step back and examine that no. Where is that no coming from? And maybe you don't even have to figure it out in the moment. Just relax it a little bit and look at your child again and just see if you can observe them with a sort of in a sort of not a detached way. That's not exactly the way I want to put it, but just a neutral stance. Like pretend they're not your child for a moment and just watch them and see what they do. You might be able to pick up on something that you haven't seen before.
Yes. And as you look at what you've done and the people that you've worked with, what would you say is the percentage, and this is an unfair question, but really, what's the percentage of those that know their gift from the beginning and follow that versus those of us that end up in some type of profession or some type of work of some sort that really it's not their gift?
It's very interesting you should ask. And I hope it's okay to mention that I also have a podcast and I interview people who knew those gifts. So they found their calling. And I work with clients who didn't know those gifts. And so they didn't know what their calling was. And the interesting thing about both of them, both sets of people had gifts early on. The difference was the people who knew their gifts were supported. They were supported by their families. Somebody in their family saw it. A teacher encouraged them. Only takes one person even, or they just happen to fit in a culture that supported what they do naturally. The people that I work with who didn't remember their gifts because the gifts were there were not supported. So they stuffed them down. They forgot who they were. And then they just started listening to what the world told them to be. That is the chief difference. Everybody's got those gifts from the get-go.
Well, and it's fascinating. I think that sometimes it can be very dramatic. I remember, and I've shared this story before, but I had my dental practice for 21 years, and then ultimately there was some physical issues that didn't allow me to do that anymore. Went back to business school and was, decided I was going to do some coaching and helping people with small businesses, and I was enjoying that. my dad passed away in 2010.
Mm.
And I remember that he had taught at Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois.
Mm.
And they decided to have a memorial concert for him. And so they invited us all back. They asked permission. Of course, we gave it. And so we all went back, and they brought all of the, as many as could, the singers that were out doing operas and everything, both internationally as well as nationally, and talking about stories about my dad and so on and so forth, and then doing some singing. And I walked out of there, and I looked at my brothers and my little sister, and I thought, what? Did you really get did you hear what I heard today? And they're looking at me strange, and it's like, here was the story that I got at that memorial concert from hearing everyone speak as well as sing. Number one, Norman, he was an amazing voice teacher.
Mm.
But what he really did for us was teach us to win. He gave us the strength and the ability to win, to love, to live. And that's what changed me. And all of a sudden I thought, you know what, here's my dad who was a great voice teacher, but on the side, he affected his students in a much more powerful way. And in fact, one student told a story about how they used to play tennis, which was weird because they were years apart, but they were friends, and how every once in a while, my dad would win when he was playing in his 70s, right? And he says, I could never figure it out, and finally I understood. He had willed me off the court. And then he shares a story about how he was over in Germany and was auditioning for a particular opera coming against the top German tenor. And he tells the story about how he just worked hard and, practiced whatever song everybody knew that you have to do. And he says, when it was all finished, not only did I get that one, but I got the entire season. And he says, as I walked off the stage, I thought, what on earth? And then it hit me. I had willed them off the stage.
Wow.
Thank you, Norman, for teaching me that.
Wow.
And I think that when I heard these stories, it was like, you know what? Yeah, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, I'm helping people, but ultimately, I need to be able to make a difference in people's lives. I need to do something that allows me, whether it's directly or on the side, to be able to help people. And I think that's part of what motivated me to start doing this podcast.
I love it.
And obviously for you, it's a similar thing. So do you find that sometimes people have these amazing aha moments to where they realize that, you know what, this is my purpose?
Oh, absolutely. I see it all the time in my workshops. I see the light go on in somebody's eyes. In my case, I often see it with respect to discovering a gift that they didn't know they had. So the light will go off and they'll realize, oh my God, I can paint. I didn't know I could paint, or I had a woman who was 84 years old who learned that she could dance. And she could do it still because she had the ability. But absolutely, I think it happens all the time. And also, are you familiar with Carl Jung, Jungian psychology, Jungian analysis at all?
I don't think I am, but maybe as you explain it, it may be something I'm familiar with.
I just wanted to, just with respect with what you said, according to a lot of Jungian analysts, we have sort of a couple of stages in our life. And the first stage is where you sort of dutifully get a job, you raise your children, you check the boxes, you do what you should. But in the second half of life, something deeper starts calling to you, your purpose, really, something yourself, your true self, your authentic self, what you came here to do. It starts calling you because you've done that sort of work to, check the boxes in the first half of life. But now in the second half of life, it pulls you in deeper. And I think a lot of times, like as you're explaining, it's happened to me too. I just want to give back even more, while I'm still here. I hear you. I'm exactly the same way. And what I think a lot of people don't even realize is that when you do start doing that, it fills you with so much joy and energy. You think you're being selfless, but you get something from it too. Just like a side dish.
Well, and it's interesting what you went through because you found your gift of singing and and writing music and so forth. And then all of a sudden you found another purpose now and you have moved on to a different purpose. So do you find that oftentimes for people's lives that and it kind of goes about what you were talking about with the psychology concept, that they have multiple purposes, and just as we move forward in life, we discover new ones?
Yes, well, some people do. I think some people, it's different for different people. Some people do have a strong calling that they do their whole life, but many people, we have many gifts. And I think at different stages of our lives, different gifts pull at us also. I like to refer to gifts as superpowers because it makes people notice more. Like if I say, "Oh, you have a superpower," but I like the analogy of a superhero because if you think of Superman, for example, he doesn't just fly, he has X-ray vision, he can freeze things with his breath, all kinds of things like this. And likewise, human beings have lots of different gifts. And I think sometimes we're called to bring different parts of ourselves to the table, depending on where we are in our lives. So yes, I think it's very normal for people to have it's like a multifaceted purpose, or I call it a constellation calling. You've got more facets to it than you might think.
Well, and it's interesting as I was doing some business consulting for small businesses, every once in a while I'd come across someone who suddenly said, discovered a gift or discovered a passion, and it's like, okay, I'm gonna quit my job or I'm gonna close my company and I'm gonna go do this, and I'm going, whoa, slow down a minute, because I've seen people that chose to do that and then they find themselves not able to make a living, and it's really a struggle. And so, what do you recommend to people as they discover a passion, as they discover a gift? What do you recommend to them when they say, okay, I'm going to quit my job or I'm going to close my company and do this? What do you recommend to them?
I think it's really important to have one foot in each world, the world that you're already stable in and the world that you want to go into, to try to do it at the same time, to take this gift that you are discovering and to do it on the side as a side project. Uh, Even if you are starting to get tired of the career that you're in, or it's not as fulfilling as it might be, if you engage in a passion on the side, it gives you so much energy. It gives you so much aliveness that you're able to actually bring that energy back to work. And there's research that comes out of San Francisco State University that shows that people who have a creative project are they get better evaluations at work. They get promoted more at work. So you can actually gain from sort of developing your talent on the side while you keep your job and just start. I'll give you. Is it okay if I tell a quick story to
Oh,
sort of?
please, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay. So I remember once I had an attorney come to one of my workshops. This was a 2-day workshop, a Saturday and then the next Saturday. And he was an attorney. He had 2 kids in high school and a stay-at-home mom, wife. And he was starting to feel a little restless about being an attorney. He didn't really want to do it anymore. And something felt, just like it was missing from his life. And so, of course, my first thing is to try to help people find out whatever that is. So I said to him, "Oh, I want you to just pretend that you don't have a wife and you don't have children and you don't have to be an attorney. What would you do?" And I could see like his eyebrow went up and I'm like, "No wife?" And I said, just it's a thought experiment. It's just a thought experiment in here. I don't mean that you have to do it out in the world. So he said, "Okay, I'll try that." And my class was I don't know if you're familiar with California, but it was in Santa Cruz. And then he lived in uh, Monterey. So he drove down to Monterey after that class. The next week, he comes in and he says, "I know what it is. I know what it is." And I said, "What happened?" He said, "I was driving through Salinas, the fields of Salinas. And all of a sudden, I just pulled over. I got out of my car and I was doing this because the fields, they looked like they were being lit up from the inside. I want to be a photographer. And he also said, I remember I wanted to be a photographer when I was young. So what Dan did was he ended up, and this is what I would recommend, he ended up shooting photos on the side, on the weekends, on lunch breaks, after work, before the sunset, whenever he got a chance, but he did not stop being an attorney. Now you might think that would wear him down. It didn't. Like I was saying before, it filled him with all of this energy, amazing amounts of energy. And after about a year, he had a lot of photos put together, and he invited me to come down to a showing in Monterey. He had two photos that were going to be displayed alongside professionals. So I went, and his wife was there, and his kids were there, and one of the photos was just a beautiful sunset, Monterey sunset, and it was just I was so happy to see him flanked by his family who were supporting him. He never gave up anything, but there he had that photo. It sold, and he started selling photographs. And so with Dan, the idea was, in a few years, his kids will go through college and they'll be done. And then as he accumulates more and more photos, sells a few on the side, he can start making that business happen on the side if he wants to. And he doesn't even have to, because a lot of times when we find our passion, we don't have to do it for a job. I mean, it's great if we can, but we don't have to feel fulfilled by it. So that's what I would recommend. Try to do, keep both worlds going for as long as you can, and then make the leap when you feel ready.
Yeah, and I love to use the terms, it's either both and or either or. And the
Yes.
truth is, both and is what works. So I love that story because it's so true. And, oftentimes when we find that passion and we're able to do that on the side, as you say, it helps us to be better in our work. And ultimately, we may find that it's a good enough balance that we don't have to make that change, that we can keep both.
That's right. That's right.
Well, and as you've been doing these workshops, what have you found are the key elements to someone realizing that they haven't found their purpose yet, or they haven't discovered some of those gifts that should be there? And you mentioned that he was, not sure he wanted to do, law anymore, practice
Mhm.
law anymore. Have you found that there are some key elements that if someone were to stop for a minute and become aware of themselves, which we don't do very often, but if they were to do that, what are some of the indicators that they could be aware of that would say to them, you know what, you have another purpose, you have other gifts, it's time to discover what they are?
A lot of the people who take my workshops have had some sort of transition happen in their lives. I just want to tell you this first, and then I will definitely answer your question. But they may have lost a job. They may have gone through a divorce. They may have a sudden illness. This is a lot of times the kind of people that originally or initially come to me. So they're already in some sort of transition. And you might think that that's a horrible time to be in your life, but it's actually a window of opportunity, because these people come to my workshops because they know that they're missing something. They know that something's off. Something's missing, something's not right about their lives, clearly, because things have sort of fallen apart. It's not necessarily a bad thing for things to fall apart, because it gives you this huge, huge playing ground to investigate who you really are and who you might want to become once you get the courage to do that. So I just wanted to say that first. But some of the indicators that you're not following your purpose are: you're agitated, you feel restless, you feel like something's off, you're jealous of other people and what they're doing. That's a really good clue. If you watch somebody doing something and you find yourself being a little bit too critical about how they're doing it, it might be because you want to do that too, but you haven't admitted that yet. So you're just going to be hard on them. You know what I mean? So that's a good
Yes,
clue.
yes.
What else? You start realizing that there's this dream that's been on the back burner, and it seems like it's tugging at you. It starts to get in your head. You start to have ideas about doing it again. Something that you might have put away, because a lot of times people do sort of know what they want to do, but then they lose the confidence or they don't have the opportunity to do it, and they put that dream sort of on the side, and that it just starts to say, it tug at them and say, didn't you always want to teach? Don't you like teaching? Don't you like explaining things? You really like explaining things to people, just things like that. They'll just start coming to your mind. Or you might even hear, it's almost like a gift might be saying, just look at me, look at me. I like to sing. I like to sing in the shower, or I'm always writing things down. Or, sometimes this is kind of interesting, and you might find this interesting. Sometimes we're almost following our purpose. We're doing it, but we're in the wrong field. Like, for example, there was one woman who wanted to be a writer, and she did become a tech writer in Silicon Valley, but she was feeling restless and feeling like something was off and something was missing. And she also didn't look like a tech writer. She wore bunny slippers, and she had long blonde hair, and she was in the margins. She was writing little ideas for screenplays. That's how it comes out, like on the side, like it just sneaks out, like when you're not expecting it. Your pen moves over to the side and writes an idea for a screenplay. And I encouraged her to sort of pay attention to those marginalized writings. And long story short, she ended up writing 5 screenplays that got picked up by Disney, and she eventually wrote and then directed and produced her own movie, and now she lives in Hollywood. So she was she was a writer, but she was in the wrong field. You know what I mean? That's
Yes.
also sometimes what's in front of people, which is why I think it's worth taking your defenses down and just let yourself get a little soft and just let yourself really look at things, because the change that you might need to make might not even, I mean, that was a big change, but honestly, she was so built for that world that it wasn't hard for her to make. Often when you do find the marginalized voice in your head, that little voice that is whispering to you to do something, if you follow it, you'll find that, as Joseph Campbell says, doors open where there used to be walls. It's true. There's some truth to that. So that's one of the ways also that you can start to see that, oh yeah, that is a path I should be on.
So what do as the listeners are listening, and as they stop and start to consider, what are the questions that they can ask themselves to really find out what their missing talents are, if they're finding that they're really not satisfied and happy with the way their life is going?
Yeah. So I have a few questions that I like to ask people, but one of them is, what comes naturally to you? That's really easy for you. And you can especially know this if you compare yourself to others. For example, once I was getting coffee in a coffee shop, and the guy that was taking my order was doing a crossword puzzle, and he was saying to the guy in the back, what's a 4-letter word for, I forget what the question was, but the guy in the back goes, reap. It was like he just, had it. It was easy for him, but not easy for the guy that was serving me coffee. It's easy for me to hear music in my head, but not easy for somebody else to hear music in their head. And I didn't figure that out for a really long time. So what just comes easily to you? Another big one is when you do when you use the superpower, it puts you in the moment. It puts you in the now. So for example, when I write a song, time disappears. A woman I was working with, she thought she was a high-powered executive. She was really burning out. She wanted to find a creative outlet to sort of balance her out. And she thought she should do writing, be a writer like her father. But eventually it just wasn't when she would look at the clock. It wasn't happening for her. And I asked her to experiment, try some other things. And she tried a few things. And eventually she tried painting. And she went up to her attic. She sort of set it up. And she went up and she started painting, and hours would go by. And her husband would be downstairs making dinner for her. And she would never come down. Because the time disappeared. And then eventually she would come down and he would heat up the meal. But that's how she discovered, oh, painting is what it was. And then just I wanted to include that she did a portrait of her husband and won an award for it also.
Wow.
So he got back. Another thing is just like, what fills you with passion or what makes you come alive? So, before our interview, I was just sort of thinking back to myself about some of the things I do so I could refresh my memory, so I'd be ready to talk to you. And just as I was thinking about the people I work with and some of the stories I could tell, I just had so much more energy than I had a few minutes before that. So you can just notice your energy level goes up when you start to do something that's a better fit for you. And another thing is, and we were talking about it right at the beginning, what were you interested in when you were a child? And sometimes it takes a little, legwork, a little digging to go back there, but most of us had those gifts when we were young. And if, we probably got an inkling or somebody might have seen us. I remember going out with a gentleman who was in the tech world, an engineer, and I spoke to his mother once, and she said, he was just always taking everything apart. 5 years old, he's just like taking everything apart and putting it back together. So sometimes a parent does notice, so they might know if you don't. And and this is sort of points to what you were talking about doing this podcast is what is intrinsically rewarding to you. When you do it, you are fulfilled. You don't even need to be paid for it, although, surely it's nice to be paid for what you do, but you're just fulfilled by doing it. That's a huge indicator of what your calling is or what your gift is.
I love that. I love that. What are some of the other stories that you've experienced with people that where they have literally moved from one area to another area and found their passion?
Well, this is a story I love telling. So it was the first workshop I ever taught, and there was a police detective, a woman. I'll call her Maria. She had fiery red hair, and she came into my workshop, and she something wasn't quite working in her career anymore. She was only in her 40s, but she felt like she had to retire early. This was in San Jose. And, she thought that she had to completely change what she was doing. And she had a passion, and it was a real passion, and that was for traveling. And so she thought that what she should do is write travel brochures or, something about traveling. She would become a travel writer. So every week she would come to my class and she would like try to be writing these travel brochures, but they were never happening. They were never coming to her. And I could tell she didn't like writing, but she had a passion for travel. I could see that that was true. And I could also see that what was true is she loved being a police detective. She loved it. This is getting to your and idea, this and
Yes.
that. And I said to her, Maria, why do you think you have to be a police detective or you travel? Maybe it's possible that you could do both. And she really took that in. I could see that she really took that in. And a few months later, she got a job with the United Nations. She went to Bosnia training the local police force there to adopt human rights procedures. So she got to travel and she got to be a police officer, but in a much, much bigger way. I just love that she did that.
Oh, that's fascinating. And it's so interesting. As we see society right now, how much of an effect do you think not finding our passion, not really doing that which we really have the gifts to do, is affecting the overall culture right now of society that we're experiencing, which right now is not very good?
No, it's not very good. I think that's such an important question. I think it has a lot to do with what's happening right now because if you don't find your true gifts, you start to feel angry, upset, disappointed, and you can often project that onto somebody else. It's somebody else's fault. It's not mine. But even more than that, something that I wanted to say and something I deeply believe, because I work with a lot of millennials and Gen Z, and they're inheriting a really difficult world, right? And again, I've seen so many people that I've worked with find a purpose, find gifts they didn't know they have. And often when they do, they use that gift in service somehow. And I feel like we were put, each of us, every single person was put on this earth. I mean, why are we all living right now, in this point in time? I don't think it's an accident. I think each of us has a piece of the puzzle to help solve this. It's not like we're supposed to wait for somebody else to solve it. We're all supposed to get on board. And it's my deep, deep belief that when people will just take some time to get to know themselves better and to find that gift, that they can then use that gift to bring their part to the table, you know? So I'll just give you an example of something that might seem like a small gift, but it's so important. I was working with a young woman who she was unhappy. She was a receptionist. Her boyfriend was teasing her because she had a lot of stuffed animals and she liked to watch Beauty and the Beast over and over again. And she just, didn't like speaking up in class. She didn't like who she was. And one day she, asked me if I thought there was something wrong with her because, she was in her 20s. And I looked at her and she had so much integrity. I just thought, no, I don't think there's anything wrong with you. And I said, why? And she said, well, my boyfriend thinks I shouldn't be doing all this. He made me give all my stuffed animals away. And I said, and you could see everybody in the room was like, that's not cool. And so anyway, she left her boyfriend and she started to find her own voice. And what we started to discover together was that she could see the world through the eyes of a child. That's what she was really good at. And her true calling was to be a kindergarten teacher. And she is a fabulous one. She's been doing it for years. And you want a kindergarten teacher like that, someone
Oh,
who's
yeah.
really, right? Somebody who's really into it, who is answering her true calling because she is a role model just by her essence, her energy, the way she carries herself and the way she talks. She's a role model to those little kids in her class to be who they really are. So there's no gift that's too small. And I honestly believe that each of us has a responsibility uh, to bring our own piece of the puzzle together and solve the world problems together.
And can you imagine what the world would be like if each individual was able to find that gift and express it in their lives, which, as you say, once you found that gift or once you found that passion, it elevates your emotions, it elevates your whole life experience. Can you imagine? And I'd like to talk about the one. We keep hearing people talk about, and I did this initially as I started my podcast. Oh, am I going to reach millions of people? Am I going to do this and that? And finally it hit me. It doesn't matter. What matters is, can I reach one? And will it make the difference in the life of one individual? And periodically when I get, a message from someone saying, hey, I just love it, made such a difference to hear this podcast in my life. It's like, okay, that's why I'm doing this. And can you imagine if each person as a one were to discover their gifts and to start to follow those and have that emotional elevation that would occur, what it would do to the world?
I think we need to do this. I think, I mean, and what's interesting about the younger generations, because I work with them a lot, is they value authenticity, they value diversity, they value being of service. It's really, really important to them. And so I feel like they're halfway there already. Their values are already right on line. You know what I mean? But it's just a matter of them digging in and finding out what their path is. But I think there's hope that this may happen.
Well, and as we close the show today, what would be, take about a minute, what would be the final message that you would like to share with the audience?
It's okay to feel like you're weird. It's okay to feel like you don't belong. If you feel like you don't belong to a certain group that you're hanging out with, a certain tribe that you may be in, it's probably an indicator that your calling is pulling you in a new direction. It's not a bad thing. Don't freak out about it. Don't worry about it. Open your heart up, find out where you're being called and feel like I give you permission. I, Michelle Chappel, give you permission to follow that. The feeling of not belonging is often the very first step in finding your true calling.
I love that. Michelle, thank you so much for being on the show. I really
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
What tremendous insights you've shared. And so how do folks find you? If they're finding that, I need some help, how can they find you?
I have a website called Be Your Own Superhero, which is all about finding your unique superpowers. So beyourownsuperhero.com. I also have a podcast called Your True Calling, Find Your Hidden Superpowers. So those are two good ways to find me.
And your podcast is on most of the podcast apps.
Yeah, it's on Apple and Google and iHeartRadio and yeah, it's out there.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well,
I really
thanks.
enjoyed you. Thank you so much.
Well, and thank you. And folks, thanks for listening. And I hope this has made a difference in your lives as you consider what is your purpose, what are your gifts. And you know what? As Michelle was saying, we encourage you to discover what those are because it's going to make a difference in your life. Enjoy the week or the rest of the week, and we hope that you'll join us again soon.